Hey guys, welcome to Calm History. My name is Stefan. How's your day going? If it's been a great one, drop a 1 in the comments to spread some positive energy. And if things haven't felt quite right, leave a 2, because you're not alone. I'm here with you, walking this journey together, so that each moment ahead feels a little lighter, a little more peaceful. Tonight we travel across time and sand, guided not by stars or compasses, but by the ancient roads that once pulsed through the heart of mighty African kingdoms. You find yourself standing beneath a velvet sky, where the moon hangs low in gold. The air is warm, dry, and smells faintly of dust, salt, and something sweet, maybe dates, or the last fading trace of incense from an evening meal. You're at the edge of Timbuktu, sometime in the 14th century. There's no Google Maps, no GPS chirping from your pocket. But you don't need them. The road before you is broad, compacted, and smooth, lined with low walls of stone that shimmer faintly in the starlight. Lanterns flicker at waypoints, casting long shadows over trade carts and tired donkeys. You hear the clink of metal, the distant jingle of camel bells, and the soft lull of people speaking many languages: Arabic, Sonic, Fulani, all folding together like a desert lullaby. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop a comment with your location and local time? I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin walking. Not briskly. This isn't that kind of story. But slowly, like someone with all night to reach nowhere in particular. Every few steps, your sandals crunch gently on packed earth that feels curiously firm, not because of magic, but because long ago, this route was maintained by skilled road crews. Yes, road crews. And no, not the grumpy orange-vested kind. These were craftsmen and hired laborers who patched, widened, and even swept the major arteries that link cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Jen. You pass a way station, its roof made of sun-dried brick, where merchants pause to sip honeyed water and check their ledgers. Behind the building is a small shrine, its base strewn with worn pebbles and folded cloth offerings. A few goats wander nearby, blissfully unaware they're resting on what might be the best road in 14th century Africa, and arguably, better than anything Europe had at the time. Hey, if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. I'm curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's roads were formally engineered or evolved organically through centuries of caravan traffic. But what's certain is this: travelers could move faster and safer across parts of West Africa than they could through much of feudal Europe's swampy, rut-filled mess. Imagine being a merchant from Fez arriving here after weeks of desert travel. You'd probably drop to your knees and kiss the ground, not just because you survived the Sahara, but because this road has actual drainage. A rare luxury back in Europe, where the word pavement often meant hope for the best. In fact, some early Islamic geographers noted how well maintained the roads were in these African empires. One described them as firm underfoot, shaded with trees, and bordered by watchposts, a level of infrastructure more associated with Rome than, say, medieval France. And no offense to medieval France, but they were still figuring out how not to flood every time it rained. You pause at a fork in the path, where a stone marker shaped like a camel's hump tells you the distance to the next trade town. It's chipped, weather-worn, but still readable. Well, if you read Songhai script. You run your fingers across the grooves and think about the hands that carved it centuries ago, possibly while swatting flies and cursing the heat. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some believe that these roads were spiritually protected. That along certain routes, protective charms were buried beneath the soil to ward off bandits and misfortune. Little pouches of herbs, bones, and metal rings, kind of like magical pothole insurance. As you follow the road toward the heart of the city, the walls of Timbuktu loom closer, tall, earthen, and surprisingly elegant. They curve slightly, like waves frozen in time. On either side, the architecture becomes more intricate: carved wooden doors, stucco adorned with geometric designs, windows latticed with fine meshwork to let air in and keep dust out. You enter through a small archway, not grand like a Roman gate, but dignified, quiet. Inside, everything feels hushed, even though there are people everywhere. A woman in indigo robes haggles over salt. 2 boys carry a rolled-up carpet between them, grunting theatrically. A man with a silver beard sits cross-legged on a stool, brushing camel hair from his shoes with a little twig broom. It's ordinary and extraordinary all at once. And here's a lovely paradox. Despite being part of a vast and wealthy empire, Timbuktu doesn't scream its importance. It whispers it. The roads are not for parades or war horses, but for scribes, merchants, midwives, and gossip. They carry grain and knowledge and secrets and time. You rest beside a fountain, trickling slowly beneath a fig tree. A cat blinks at you lazily. Somewhere nearby, a student recites verses aloud from a manuscript, his voice low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat written in ink. You wonder how many feet have passed through this square. How many stories have been left behind in the grooves of this ancient road. How many dreams were carried away, on dust and hoof, toward the horizon. It's peaceful. Not perfect, but peaceful. And you realize, roads aren't just for getting somewhere. They're for remembering where you've been. The road that leaves Timbuktu stretches eastward, then curves like a lazy snake down toward the Sahel, a vast band of golden grassland that lies between the Sahara's endless sands and the dense forests farther south. You travel it now, quietly, your sandals brushing against gravel and pressed soil so finely packed it almost feels intentional. And that's because, well, it was. The Sahel's roads weren't just dusty footpaths. They were, in many places, broad and organized, formed from centuries of trade and state-backed maintenance. These weren't makeshift trails worn by wandering goats. They were deliberate arteries that connected kingdoms, markets, and people in ways many 19th century European planners would later try, and fail, to copy without the same graceful efficiency. You pass an old fig tree near a crossroads. Underneath it, a stone bench has settled into the earth like it's giving up, but in a dignified way. A herder naps nearby, his staff resting across his chest. His flock waits patiently, one goat chewing on what is absolutely not food. You step around the goat politely. The road here forks into 3 directions, each marked with a carved slab bearing glyphs and symbols. They don't look like much at first, maybe the ancient equivalent of road signs with flair, but if you know what you're looking at, you can read them like a timetable. Distance to the next watering hole. Market days. When not to travel due to bandits. Think of it as a lonely planet guide carved into rock. You follow the road south, and it's remarkable how good the surface feels. It's flat, yes, but also slightly raised in the middle so that water runs off during rains. Because no one likes walking in mud up to their knees, especially when you're carrying a basket of millet on your head. Europe, meanwhile, was still struggling to keep wagons from sinking entirely during spring thaw. Historians still argue whether these roads were formally planned by centralized governments or evolved through centuries of communal upkeep, but either way, they worked. Villages often coordinated road upkeep as part of civic duties. One group might sweep debris, another patch erosion. It's not unlike a neighborhood WhatsApp group today, except with fewer emojis and more brooms. And let's not overlook the irony here. While 17th century English travelers were writing angrily about cartwheels getting stuck in bogs just outside London, West African traders were strolling along sun-dried routes that were, dare we say, pedestrian-friendly. Here's something quirky. Some Sahel roads featured musical stones. Yes, actual rocks that rang when tapped. Travelers would knock on them as they passed, either for fun or as a way to send simple signals. Was that a message about a lion sighting ahead? Or just someone testing their inner drummer? We may never know. But it's lovely to imagine a road that hums back at you. You stop beside a watering station. It's shaded by woven palm mats stretched between wooden poles, and there's a large clay jar set deep into the ground, holding cool water. A ladle made from a gourd floats on top. A boy offers it to you with a grin and a nod. You accept, drink slowly, and hand it back. His smile says, "You're welcome, but also, You really need to keep moving before my goats scatter. And so you do? As you walk, the landscape changes subtly. Trees become more frequent, the air carries more moisture, and the wind smells of earth and faraway rain. You pass through hamlets and villages where homes are built in tight circles, thatched roofs softening the lines of the horizon. Some children wave. One very small child bursts into terrified tears at the sight of a stranger. You wave anyway. In one village, you find a road repair team. They're not wearing reflective vests, but their focus is clear. A man smooths down new clay with a flat board while another fills in gaps with crushed rock. An older woman sprinkles water to help the surface bind. A child follows behind, patting the road like it's a beloved pet. They're working together, not because anyone's making them, but because they'll be walking this road tomorrow. Compare this to the mess that was post-Roman Europe. Roads once paved by the empire had, by this point, largely fallen apart. Some places actually dismantled Roman roads to reuse the stones for churches or manor walls. By the time you reach the Middle Ages, moving goods across a couple of counties in France could take longer than crossing whole regions of West Africa. You spot a lone traveler approaching from the other direction. His robe flutters like a sail, his face mostly hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. As you near, you both nod, just enough to acknowledge. Yes, we are both walking this ancient trail between memories. And then, like two ghosts meeting on a page of history, you pass each other and keep going. Further ahead, the road crests a gentle hill, and suddenly you can see for miles. The path glows slightly in the afternoon sun, bordered by low grass and occasional red stones. There's no grand monument, no statue declaring, "This road is historic." And yet it is. Because this road, like so many others in forgotten corners of the Sahel, carried more than just people. It carried ideas, stories, futures. It connected scholars with manuscripts, farmers with markets, lovers with letters. It bore the weight of gold and gossip in equal measure. So the next time someone says, "Africa didn't have roads," you'll remember this view. This sound of your own slow footsteps on centuries-old clay. And maybe you'll smile just a little before replying. Actually, some of them were better than Europe's. You've followed the path through the Sahel, and now the air begins to shift. It thickens slightly, full of dust and sun, as you descend into the heartland of an empire built on gold and memory. The Mali Empire, more specifically, the age of Mansa Musa. And yes, that's the Mansa Musa, often dubbed the richest man who ever lived, though he never once launched a luxury cologne line or bought a football team. You trudge into the city of Niani, the empire's capital, where even the road leading in feels like a flex. Smooth, wide, and bordered by neatly lined hedges and low stone markers, it gives off the vibe of a civilization that didn't just understand commerce. They planned for it. Wagons, camels, and traders flow through this artery like blood through a healthy body. What's most striking is how intentional it all feels. The roads aren't chaotic. They're structured. There are designated turnouts where merchants pause to adjust loads or water their animals. Shade trees planted at intervals offer resting places. You spot a boy carrying baskets of kola nuts on his head, walking barefoot but confident, clearly knowing every dip and bend by heart. Now, Mansa Musa didn't just build roads for practicality. He built them to impress. Remember that time in 1324 when he took a little pilgrimage to Mecca and accidentally crashed the gold market in Cairo by spending so much? Yeah, that guy also made sure his empire's roads dazzled. His massive caravan needed infrastructure to support it: rest stations, wells, storage depots, and guides. The logistics alone were enough to make a modern delivery app cry. Historians still argue whether these road improvements were directly overseen by Musa himself or by governors under his rule, but what's clear is this: the road system helped tie together a vast, multilingual, multi-ethnic empire. It connected desert oases with forest villages, markets with mosques, scholars with scribes. And oh, the gold. Carried in woven satchels and tightly sealed leather pouches, gold dust was so abundant it functioned like everyday currency. You pass a trader now, seated by the side of the road, meticulously weighing a handful of gold flakes on a tiny copper scale before exchanging them for carved ivory bangles. You can hear the faint jingle of coins in a belt pouch as another traveler strolls by, whistling a tune older than paper money. Let's not ignore the fringe tidbit. Some legends claim that certain road routes through Mali were lined with crushed gold for special events. Is it true? Hard to say. It sounds a little like the medieval version of clickbait. But even if it's not, the empire was so flush with gold that travelers sometimes left it in shrines as casual offerings. Here, take some spare opulence for the ancestors. You follow a side road that leads toward a quieter part of the city, one where scholars gather under canopies, scribbling notes on parchment, and reciting long chains of memorized genealogy. This was an intellectual empire as much as a commercial one. Roads didn't just carry goods. They carried minds. Manuscripts from North Africa and the Islamic world made their way here via camel trains and careful couriers. One such courier, a wiry man with sun-leathered skin and eyes like polished obsidian, nods as he passes. He's got scrolls tucked under his tunic and sandals worn from thousands of careful steps. You wonder what it's like to walk knowledge across an empire, one dusty mile at a time. The road you're on now starts to slope gently downward toward a river, one of many that made this region so fertile, so connectable. Bridges here aren't grand stone arches like in Europe, but clever wooden structures reinforced with bundles of reeds and sun-dried clay. They don't look like much, but they hold. They always do. You cross as birds chatter overhead, and the smell of papyrus and fish tickles your nose. A fisherman sits in a hollowed-out log boat nearby, dragging a net through water the color of tea. He nods toward the road, says nothing, and keeps rowing. There's a rhythm to life here, to movement, to the road itself. Like the empire it serves, it's confident, ancient, and still somehow alive. Back on the main path, you pass a rest station. Think of it like a 14th century truck stop but with fewer snacks and more goats. There's a shaded shelter, a couple of stone benches, and a place where travelers can refill their water skins. A young woman offers dates and dried mango slices for a few nuggets of salt. You trade, thank her, and chew slowly as you walk. Ahead, a caravan is preparing to move out. Dozens of camels groan and grumble as their handlers tighten ropes and check cargo. One camel sneezes dramatically on a man's tunic. No one blinks. It's just another Tuesday in the Mali Empire. A rider mounted on a sleek horse scans the road ahead. His robe is indigo dyed, deep and vibrant, a mark of status. He sees you, nods once, and rides on, the hooves clicking rhythmically against the road that Mansa Musa helped build. You keep walking, realizing that this road, this simple strip of earth, has outlived kingdoms, caravans, even the empire itself. But its shape remains. Its direction. Its purpose. You step a little lighter now, not out of reverence, but out of something quieter, respect. For the road. For its builders. For its dust, still golden beneath your feet. You're still walking, and now the soil beneath your feet starts to change. It darkens. Hardens. And soon enough, you reach the wide, deliberate paths of another African marvel, the Kingdom of Benin. Not to be confused with the modern-day nation of Benin, this place, this city, was once so advanced that early European visitors assumed it had been designed by outsiders. Because heaven forbid brown people figure out urban planning. You wander toward the center of Benin City, where its famed network of roads radiates outward like spokes from a cosmic wheel. They're not casual paths worn into the ground, they're planned. Dug deep. Lined with red clay and tightly packed earth that resists erosion. You're told these roads connected districts with palaces, markets, and sacred sites. A literal infrastructure of power, culture, and community. And they were wide. Really wide. Some streets were broad enough for 9 people to walk side by side, assuming they weren't doing the awkward sidewalk dance of who moves left first. Historians still argue whether this layout was purely practical or also symbolic, aligning with celestial patterns or sacred geography. You don't know, but you can feel the intention under your soles. The main road is flanked by deep ditches, used not for draining stormwater, but for collecting household waste and keeping the center path clean. Ingenious, really? Especially considering that London, around the same time, was still dumping chamber pots out windows with a cheerful "Gare-de-la." As you stroll deeper into the city, the architecture becomes more intricate. Wattle and daub walls rise on either side of the road, decorated with linear patterns and symbols that whisper of ancestors, achievements, and spirits watching from behind carved doors. The scent of palm oil, roasted yams, and something faintly floral rides the breeze. A child darts past you, giggling, his feet bare but confident on the warm red earth. He's carrying a carved wooden toy, a tiny horse on wheels. Which is ironic, really, because in Benin, people had a complicated relationship with wheeled transport. Roads were made primarily for foot traffic and hand-drawn carts, not chariots or carriages. The terrain and tree density made that impractical. It's not a technological limitation, it's an adaptation. One corner you pass is particularly bustling. A woman in a patterned wrap directs foot traffic with the grace of someone who's clearly been ignored by passers-by for years. Still, she manages to part the crowd just long enough for two porters to shuffle through, balancing enormous clay pots on their heads. The pots wobble but never fall. You try not to blink. Benin City's layout was more than just practical, it was political. Each ward had a head, each section a specific trade or role. Ironworkers here. Ivory carvers there. Drummers and dancers near the temple. Square. The roads didn't just lead to places. They defined them. Kind of like how a hallway in your house doesn't just connect rooms, it makes the house a house. Let's talk fringe facts for a moment. Some oral traditions say that the great earthworks surrounding Benin, ramparts and moats collectively longer than the Great Wall of China, were dug by hand, using wooden spades and sheer stubbornness. The walls themselves weren't just barriers. They reinforced the roads, stabilized the layout, and defined who was in and who was very much out. Eat your heart out, city zoning boards. You stop by a low platform near one of the city's main intersections. An elder sits there, quietly observing the movement of people like a librarian watching noisy teens tiptoe past the reference desk. His staff is etched with symbols of office. His expression is unreadable but calm. You imagine he's been watching this same road for decades, and the road, in turn, has been watching back. Some European visitors wrote home that Benin's streets were cleaner, straighter, and more organized than anything they'd seen in Europe. Which is saying something. Remember, Paris was still a labyrinth of horse manure and rotting vegetables. Meanwhile, here in Benin, roads were swept daily, lined with ceremonial sculptures, and, here's a charming detail, sometimes even perfumed with crushed herbs during festivals. Yep. Scented streets. Your neighborhood probably doesn't even have unscented trash pickup. You pause near a mural carved into a courtyard wall. It shows a procession, priests, warriors, dancers, and a figure in elaborate regalia riding a palanquin. The Oba himself. The king. All roads lead to the palace in this city, not metaphorically, but quite literally. Urban design as devotion. And then there's the sound. The muffled percussion of footfalls on hard earth. The distant echo of a talking drum relaying messages in rhythmic code. A mother calling her children in through an open doorway. It's all part of the road, part of the city's heartbeat. A pulse that's traveled centuries, through every footprint. You leave the intersection and follow a smaller path branching off to the north. It narrows slightly but stays smooth and even. This one is lined with carved poles and stone jars filled with ashes and offerings, charms to protect the travelers or maybe just a way to remind people where their ancestors once walked. You tiptoe past out of respect, careful not to disturb the dust too loudly. By the time the sun begins to dip, the road glows a deep burnt orange, and the buildings soften into silhouettes. You take a seat on a low bench beside a shop that sells palm wine and dried plantains. The road has emptied slightly, but even in its quiet, it hums. Because this isn't just a road. It's a stage. A memory. A map made of footsteps. And tonight, it's let you walk it like one of its own. As twilight settles, you continue your journey, this time venturing westward toward the shadowed legacy of the Kingdom of Congo. You pass into what once was a formidable Central African power, stretching across parts of modern-day Angola, the Republic of the Congo, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And once again, it's the roads that greet you first. Not crumbling paths, but smooth, intentional corridors, traced with stone markers and compacted clay, connecting a network of settlements that pulse like arteries around the heart of influence. The capital, Banza Congo, rises on a series of gentle hills, and you climb with quiet reverence. It's not a dramatic, skyline-grabbing ascent. No towering spires or triumphant arches, just the rhythmic slap of your sandals against neatly maintained paths. The sounds here are softer, the occasional bray of a donkey, a vendor's call somewhere behind a cluster of wooden stalls, the coo of doves in a rooftop cage. The earth smells of sweet grass and burnt wood, like someone just finished a cooking fire and forgot to invite you. These roads weren't just laid out for the elite. They were communal, built and maintained by locals as part of a civic duty called Nzimba labor. Everyone had a part to play. And the clever part? The kingdom didn't rely heavily on beasts of burden. It was primarily human transport, feet, hands, heads balancing baskets of dried fish, iron tools, or letters bound with dyed bark cord. Historians still argue whether the Congo elite modeled their infrastructure after European cities post-contact, or if it was the Portuguese who later copied Congo practices when scrambling to catch up. Either way, you can feel the presence of purpose here. Paths that don't just connect buildings, but beliefs, ideas, lives. Now here's a fringe gem for you. Some roadways in Congo were not just for walking. They were ceremonial. Specific routes were reserved for ritual processions, and stepping on them without permission, especially barefoot, was considered deeply disrespectful. You glanced down at your own feet. Not barefoot. Not. Today. Few. You reached the crest of the main hill, where the old palace compound once stood, stone foundations wrapped in the hush of memory. It's peaceful now, the kind of place where you instinctively lower your voice, even though no one's there to shush you. The remains suggest a complex of courtyards, workshops, and audience spaces. From here, roads unfurl in every direction, almost as if the world itself was drawn toward this center. One path winds toward the missionaries' quarter, where the arrival of the Portuguese in the 15th century left architectural footprints you can still see today. Arches where there were once flat walls, Latin inscriptions faded alongside Kikongo script. Congo rulers converted to Christianity early on, adapting Catholicism into a uniquely African form. And it was along these very roads that news of baptisms, births, and wars traveled. Sometimes on foot. Sometimes whispered. A woman with a woven basket on her head offers you a piece of dried mango, unsmiling but generous. You take it with a nod, savoring the tang, letting the sweetness slow your steps. Behind her, a group of children race wooden wheels down the path, laughing with the pure, chaotic energy of kids who will absolutely not stop when you ask them to. And why would they? These roads are theirs. It's hard not to marvel at the harmony here. Roads wide enough for communal gatherings, yet still intimate. Carefully bordered by banana leaves and upright stones, sometimes marked with carved totems or small spirit shrines. Every so often, a series of flat rocks, stepping stones really, breaks the flow, designed not to slow you, but to guide you. Like punctuation in a sentence meant to be read with care. You pause near a flat platform where drummers once played during royal announcements. You imagine the echo of sound bouncing down the road, summoning townspeople with rhythms more persuasive than any written decree. Drums here were more than music, they were messengers. Their beats conveyed everything from royal births to impending conflict. And yes, sometimes the start of a really good party. The roads in Congo weren't static either. They evolved. Expanded. When the capital relocated temporarily to South Salvador after conflicts, roads were rebuilt to match. This mobility didn't weaken the kingdom, it made it adaptive. Responsive. More. Download the new patch. Then, abandon the game. Still, it wasn't perfect. The late 1600s brought decline, internal strife, invasions, the increasing entanglements of the Atlantic slave trade. Some roads fell into disuse, overgrown with grass that now whispers around your ankles. But others still stretch onward, used daily by farmers, travelers, and market-goers. They don't carry royal edicts anymore, just cassava roots and fresh eggs. But maybe that's what roads are for anyway. Continuity, not glory. Here's something historians like to wrestle with. Was Congo's road system unique because of its topography, or did its success lie in the spiritual and social framework behind its use? Were roads sacred paths, or just practical necessities? The answer is probably both. And maybe neither. But either way, you keep walking. As evening deepens, oil lamps begin to flicker in small alcoves along the road, shells filled with fat, wicks catching flame in the warm air. They cast dancing shadows on the red-brown clay. Somewhere down a side path, someone is pounding millet into flour, the thudding a gentle metronome to your wandering. You stop beneath a breadfruit tree where the road forks. One path leads toward a marketplace you can already smell: spices, smoked fish, and something sharp that might be fermented palm wine. The other disappears into a stand of trees where fireflies blink lazily. You choose the quieter path. It feels right. And as you walk that slow, firefly-lit trail, you realize something. These lost kingdoms weren't really lost at all. Their roads are still here. Their rhythm still hums beneath the dirt. You're not tracing ruins, you're following routes still in motion. You step carefully beneath the boughs of twilight trees, the air thick with the scent of wet earth, and something faintly floral. Maybe wild basil, or some cousin of jasmine that's decided to go rogue in the underbrush. The firefly-lit path you've chosen now opens into the ancient territories of the Kingdom of Buganda, nestled in the lush heartland around Lake Victoria. You hear the road before you see it, soft footfalls, the occasional snort of a cow, the swish of a reed basket against someone's hip. Buganda didn't pave its roads with stone. Instead, these were living corridors, wide, well-tended footpaths that curled through forests and banana plantations like veins through muscle. And yes, they may not look like much at first, just a clearing in the grass. But once you step onto one, it carries you like a river. And here's a delightful oddity. Some of Buganda's roads were designed wide enough for royal litters. Massive, decorative platforms carried on shoulders. You didn't just walk to meet the Kabaka, that's the king, by the way. You arrived borne aloft, shaded by bark cloth canopies, surrounded by song. It was dramatic. And you probably wouldn't survive that kind of entrance today without at least one sprained ankle and a viral TikTok moment. But back then, it was pageantry with a purpose. The road leading to the royal palace at Mengo Hill in what is now Kampala was a ceremonial masterpiece. Lined with earth packed so tightly it echoed underfoot, shaded by flame trees that exploded in red blossoms during the right season, and swept daily to keep the dust from caking into ankle-deep layers. The road was status. Proximity to it mattered. Merchants and high-ranking officials built homes nearby so they could be closer to royal traffic. And when the Kabaka traveled, everything stopped. People cleared the roads, and witnesses lowered themselves to the ground, not out of fear, but reverence. This wasn't just a path. It was a story being told. Historians still argue whether the Bugandan road system was influenced by earlier Bantu migratory paths or whether it arose independently as the kingdom's territory expanded. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the overgrown hedgerow between the two. But either way, the roads linked an empire that prized order, ceremony, and a kind of graceful efficiency. Here's a fringe detail that's just too good not to mention. Bugandan officials sometimes conducted surprise road inspections. If you were in charge of a section of road and it had fallen into disrepair, say, a ditch hadn't been filled in or the trail had narrowed from livestock erosion, you could be summoned to explain yourself. In some cases, you might be asked to rewalk the road with a calabash of water balanced on your head. If you spilled any, well, guess who's spending the week repacking soil by hand? You follow one such trail now, soft and springy beneath your feet, shaded by banana leaves so broad they might as well be umbrellas. Every so often you pass a wayside shrine, small, carved wooden figures wrapped in vines, tucked into niches of earth like they're listening. Or maybe judging. Hard to say. One of them has a face shaped suspiciously like your old math teacher. The road crests a ridge, and you pause to take it in. Below, a village fans out in concentric circles around a central drum tower. Smoke curls lazily from thatched huts. Children chase each other between clusters of plantains. And just visible in the middle of it all, another road. This one brighter, baked by the sun, cleared of weeds, marked by 2 narrow trenches on either side to guide runoff during rainy season. You descend slowly. With each step, you start to notice the rhythm of life woven into the road's very design. At one curve, there's a communal well, deep and ringed with stone, always placed near crossroads to ensure constant access. At another bend, a tamarind tree serves as the village message board. People leave notes, tiny carvings on bark, bunches of grass tied in coated knots, or even small piles of pebbles laid out in agreed-upon patterns. And that drum you heard earlier? It's not just for music. In Buganda, drums were the preferred mode of public communication. There were entire codes, different beats and rhythms that announced births, deaths, invasions, and rain festivals. The road you walk might look silent, but it used to sing. Eventually, you reach a fork where one path continues on toward the royal court, and the other leads down to the lakeshore. A man is sitting there on a log, weaving a fish trap from reeds and humming a tune that refuses to stick in your memory no matter how hard you try. He nods as you pass. Doesn't speak. Just gestures with a flick of his chin, like the road itself will explain everything. So you follow. And here's the subtle brilliance of it all. These roads were intentionally bendy. Not the shortest route from A to B. No Roman grids here. The paths curved around sacred groves, around termite mounds thought to house spirits, around ancestor trees where offerings were still made. This wasn't inefficiency. It was reverence disguised as planning. By the time you reach the lake, the road has thinned to little more than a dusty whisper between reeds. The sky has turned that deep purplish blue you only get in humid air after a hot day. A pair of canoes drift lazily near the dock. And there, carved into the soft mud by the landing, more footprints. Some human. Some goat. One that might actually be a chicken doing a tight U-turn. You take off your shoes, press your own feet into the clay. Just once. Somewhere behind you, the road continues. Your feet are still damp with lake mud as you rejoin the road inland. This time, it leads you to a different world entirely, north and west across dusty savanna and forest until the terrain swells into the high plateaus of present-day Mali. The sky is wider here. The air smells drier, the wind coarser, and if you close your eyes, you might just hear the low hum of camel bells in the distance. You're entering the domain of the once mighty Mali Empire, which by the 14th century had built an infrastructure that made European cartographers both fascinated and vaguely uncomfortable. And for good reason. Mali's roadways, used heavily for trans-Saharan trade, weren't cobblestone marvels, but they were expansive, carefully mapped, and in many places, maintained by local chiefs under imperial supervision. These weren't just dirt paths, they were information highways. Caravanserais, or desert inns, were placed roughly every 20 to 30 kilometers, offering water, shelter, and sometimes even storytellers for hire. Picture a desert pit stop with less soda and more epics about Sundiata Keita, the empire's founding hero who, legend has it, could crush iron in his bare hands. Honestly, we all knew a gym bro like that once. You pass a weathered signpost, a simple stack of stones, each arranged in a unique, regional pattern. Maybe one stone has a flat side turned east to catch the sun. Maybe another has a scratch where a merchant once counted how many camels he lost to exhaustion that week. Who's to say? The road you're on now once connected Timbuktu to Niani, and further still to the salt mines of Tagaza and the golden veins of the Beret region. It shimmered in the heat. It echoed with the chant of traders walking for weeks. It bore not just goods, but ideas, and travelers from as far away as Cairo and Granada. They came with scrolls, spices, and silk, and they left with manuscripts, beads, and stories they couldn't quite explain to anyone back home. One historical fact: during the reign of Mansa Musa, arguably the richest man in history, Mali's road system was refined and expanded to accommodate both royal processions and large trade convoys. When Musa made his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he didn't exactly travel light. His caravan reportedly included tens of thousands of attendants and a parade of gold-laden camels so excessive that Cairo's economy wobbled under the weight of his generosity. Historians still argue whether the inflation he caused was accidental or a subtle geopolitical flex. You crest a dune and see the old path unfurl beneath you. It isn't a single track, it's braided, layered, alive with centuries of footfalls, wagon grooves, and sandstorms rearranging the surface like a chalkboard constantly being rewritten. Some tracks veer slightly east, dodging old acacia groves. Others dip into the lowlands, following water tables you can't even see. And then there's the fringe tidbit of this journey. Some travelers in medieval Mali carried musical instruments as a navigational aid. Not just for entertainment, mind you, but as literal sound maps. Each town or rest station had a known drum rhythm or flute motif. If a caravan was unsure of its route during a dust storm, a musician might play the tune of the next stop, hoping someone nearby would recognize it and respond in kind. GPS, but jazzier. You press forward through the heat shimmer, your shadow long and twitching like it's not quite tethered to your body. A lizard skitters past. Somewhere, a boy calls out in Songhai, laughing at something you'll never translate. Maybe he's teasing a goat. Maybe he's mocking your walk. Both would be fair. As night approaches, the desert doesn't cool gently. It drops into chill like someone yanked the sun out by its roots. You huddle near a fire pit, a ring of stones that looks ancient but has warm coals still glowing faintly. Someone passed through recently. Maybe yesterday. Maybe this morning. There's a palm frond mat tucked under a rock, and beside it, a single leather sandal. One. Not a pair. It feels oddly comforting. And it's worth remembering, these were roads without borders. No national checkpoints. No speed limits. No passport control. Instead, there were stories. You announce yourself with your language, your accent, your wares. And depending on the ruler at the time, you might find hospitality or you might find a tax. Or both. Often both. By the time stars bleed into the sky, you're still walking. The road feels endless, and that's okay. That's how it was meant to feel. This wasn't about arrival. It was about movement, connection, memory carried in footprints. The tracks you follow are layered with the weight of salt traders, imams, griots, diplomats, and probably at least one guy who insisted he knew a shortcut and definitely got everyone lost. The moon rises. Pale and steady. It throws shadows across the ridges and glints off the back of something metal buried halfway in the sand. You reach down, brush it clear, a rusted horseshoe. Bent. Not Roman. Not European. A reminder that even desert roads had detours. Even camels sometimes made room for horses. You settle into the sand. Rest your head against your pack. The stars are so bright they hum. Tomorrow, the road continues. You wake with grit in your teeth, the kind only desert wind can deliver. It's dawn, the kind of barely there pink that makes the sky look shy. Your path today takes you farther south, where red earth thickens underfoot and the horizon rises in slow, gentle humps. Welcome to the old kingdom of Benin. And no, this isn't the modern-day nation of Benin, that's next door. We're talking about the historic empire centered in what's now southern Nigeria, one of the most sophisticated city-states of pre-colonial Africa. You squint toward the east and imagine the famed capital, a grid-planned metropolis with wide boulevards, carefully regulated markets, and yes, roads so well constructed that some early European traders muttered enviously in their journals. You walk into the edge of what once was. The forest presses close, but here and there the land opens up into traces of raised roadbeds, still evident after centuries. The air is thick, humid, fragrant with old leaves and something faintly spicy. You might be sweating, but at least the trees offer shade, unlike the sizzling openness of yesterday's sand. The paths here weren't built for camels or long-haul caravans. These were urban connectors, allowing palace messengers, soldiers, and guild members to move smoothly between city zones. Main roads were swept daily by attendants. Yes, broom-wielding workers whose job was to maintain cleanliness as a reflection of royal order. You think modern street sweepers have it rough? Imagine doing it in full sunlight, with every dusty footprint considered a tiny insult to the Oba's prestige. One mainstream fact you pass on your walk: by the 15th century, Benin City was encircled by one of the longest earthwork systems in the world. Known as the Benin Walls, they extended over 16,000 kilometers in total length, zigzagging embankments and ditches that made even European surveyors shake their heads in disbelief. Some called it an African Great Wall. Others simply didn't believe locals could have built it, which tells you more about the surveyors than the engineers. A goat bleats nearby. Possibly the same goat from Mali. Possibly a time-traveling goat. You accept it and move on. The road dips past what's left of a small shrine. You notice a carved figure, weather smooth, offering a hint of iron still clinging to its base. In Benin culture, roads weren't just transit spaces. They were ritual corridors, lined with markers and symbols to guide not just people, but spirits. Some festivals involved parading sacred objects down these roads while dancers swept ahead of them, keeping the way clean for divine passage. And here's your quirky fact: some royal messengers, especially those carrying delicate ivory or coral regalia, traveled barefoot. Not out of humility, but because the Oba's power was believed to flow through the soil. Wearing shoes might insulate the courier and block the divine current. Imagine calling out sick because your sandals were too thick. As you pass a muddy stream, still catching last night's rain, you spot a lizard doing push-ups on a rock. That, too, feels oddly ceremonial. And then comes your scholarly shrug moment. Historians still argue whether Benin's urban layout was the result of gradual adaptation or centralized planning from the start. Some claim the symmetry was intentional, mapped out by palace architects and tied to spiritual cosmology. Others say it emerged organically over generations, like sourdough bread or the internet, chaotic, sticky, and eventually delicious. You follow a curving side road and stumble upon the remains of an old guild quarter. The Benin Kingdom didn't just build roads, they built roads with jobs. Each street might belong to a different artisan group: bronze casters on one, ivory carvers on another. Their workshops lined the road, their apprentices ran errands between them, and their reputation traveled faster than you could say, "Yes, it's real gold leaf." You rest on a log beside the trail. A spider spins a web between two ferns, and for a moment, you feel like you're part of something quiet and clever. Here, knowledge was passed face to face, craft to hand, road to road. No manuals. No IKEA instructions. Just memory embedded in calloused fingers and walking feet. A bird calls overhead. Loudly. It sounds like it disapproves of your posture. So you rise. And continue. You cross a clearing, once a meeting ground, now swallowed by grass. A rustling in the underbrush suggests something small is watching you. Possibly a monkey. Possibly a time-traveling goat in disguise. You choose not to investigate. Instead, your eyes lift to where the road would have led next, the royal palace. In its time, it stood proudly behind carved gates, its courtyards paved smooth, its throne platform polished by generations of ceremonial sandals. The roads leading to it were lined with brass plaques, yes, those Benin bronzes, telling stories of past kings, fierce warriors, and gifts from the Portuguese that eventually turned awkward. You know, like when your neighbor brings wine and then colonizes your backyard. You pause again, watching the light shift through thick leaves. This road isn't straight. It curves, wavers, hums with memory. That's fine. Some roads are meant to wander. The forest thickens behind you. The path bends again. Forward, always. The shade lingers a little longer under these trees, the air damp and rich with leaf rot and history. The path narrows now, winding toward a place once known for wealth so vast it dazzled traders from distant lands, the kingdom of Ife. You tread gently on red soil, passing beneath branches that drape like curtains, nature's hushed hush over one of Africa's most artistically advanced cities. Even now, in your dust-covered shoes and travel-worn mind, you can sense it, Ife wasn't loud like Benin or sprawling like Ghana. It whispered its brilliance through bronze, terracotta, and roads that connected not just buildings, but belief systems. You step over a route and into what was once a ceremonial boulevard, maybe. Historians still argue whether the road network here was strictly for movement or part of a sacred geometric alignment. Think feng shui meets traffic control. As your footfalls fall into rhythm with the sound of birdsong, somehow both chaotic and calming, you imagine what this path once saw. Pilgrims walking barefoot, priests in embroidered tunics, kings carried on litters flanked by musicians and masked dancers. Oh yes, masked dancers. Ife didn't just build roads for trade or transport. They built avenues of expression. Rituals moved through these roads, ceremonies traveled them, and myths took shape with every footstep. Mainstream fact incoming: the kingdom of Ife, flourishing between the 11th and 15th centuries, produced some of the most naturalistic sculptures ever made in pre-colonial Africa. You might recognize the serene, almond-eyed faces of their brass heads, so finely cast that Europeans, upon seeing them in the 19th century, claimed they must have been made by lost Greek settlers. Because clearly, Africans couldn't have been talented enough on their own. Right. You shake your head, stepping over a shallow ditch. Rain has pooled here, and a frog blinks up at you like it knows something. Possibly the square root of a myth. Quirky fact time: Ife's artisans sometimes recycled broken pots and sculptures into road surfacing. Not out of disrespect, but as a form of sacred reuse. The shattered pieces of former offerings were mixed into clay and gravel, pressed underfoot so that memory, literal, fired memory, could carry the living forward. Imagine commuting across your town's art museum just to buy yams. The trail curves past what might have been a shrine or a house foundation. Hard to tell now. Trees have their own plans. But you spot something glinting, a fragment of burnished terracotta, weathered smooth. Someone once carved that with purpose. It meant something. Ife's roads weren't grand highways. They were interconnected footpaths, some only a meter wide, but they formed an organic mesh, leading from homes to temples, workshops to markets, streams to sacred groves. They made movement meaningful. Every step was a decision, and sometimes a devotion. You pause at a fork in the road. A small bird hops left. A lizard darts right. You pick the lizard's path, because clearly it seems more confident. The road slopes gently down toward what might have been a river. Ife's builders took topography seriously. Drainage mattered. A poorly engineered road here wasn't just inconvenient, it could desecrate a holy space or redirect a procession the wrong way. So yes, they graded paths, curved them to avoid sacred stones, and sometimes lined them with stones carved in spiral patterns thought to ward off bad luck. Imagine needing road signs blessed by oracles. And here's the historian quibble for this stretch. Scholars still debate whether Ife's road designs were dictated by priestly authority or evolved from community need. Was it centralized urban planning? Or did neighborhoods negotiate their own sacred shortcuts? Either way, the result was the same: elegant complexity dressed in humble earth tones. You reach what remains of an artisan's quarter. There's not much left, just soil with a memory. But you picture a potter hunched beside her kiln, road dust clinging to her forearms, shaping a ritual vessel while her daughter runs errands barefoot down the clay-packed alley. A goat bleats again. Seriously? You look back. Nothing. Maybe the goat's a metaphor now. Maybe it's your spirit animal. Ife didn't build giant ziggurats or defensive walls. They built reputation. The kind of reputation that draws merchants from Timbuktu, scholars from the Sahel, and ivory dealers with questionable ethics. What made it all possible? Roads. Not big roads. Not flashy roads. But reliable roads, maintained by mutual respect and a weirdly effective combination of ash, gravel, and wishful thinking. Some of those roads are still walkable. Not because they've been preserved, but because they were built to breathe, flexible to the land, forgiving of time, and tough enough to handle barefoot pilgrims, masked dancers, and the occasional colonial surveyor with fragile boots and fragile pride. You keep walking. Past a mossy rise, a broken pot handle, a tree that seems to bow in the breeze. You're not sure what path you're on anymore, but then again, either were half the traders who wandered Ife's sacred routes in search of meaning, marriage, or millet. There's something oddly comforting about walking on a path built for belief, not just logistics. The air is warm now. A low hum of insects rises with the heat. You wipe your brow and nod to no one in particular. Forward, always. The ground shifts slightly beneath your feet as you descend toward the kingdom of Axum, one of those places that somehow existed both inside and outside the usual maps of history. You squint against the afternoon light. Ahead, a faded road of stone and dust cuts through the highlands like a memory etched in granite. Welcome to ancient Ethiopia, minus the espresso, but plus some surprisingly advanced infrastructure. You walk with care now. These are Axumite royal roads, and while time has worn their edges and wild grasses have crept in like gossiping neighbors, you can still sense the intention behind every stone. Each curve avoids a stream bed. Each incline hugs the slope. There's logic here, elegance, even. And somewhere under the dirt is a system of paved roads, drainage ditches, and carved mile markers that once supported a kingdom with its own coins, trade routes, and divine PR campaigns. Fact check. By the 4th century CE, Axum had its own written script, Gizi, a state-sponsored conversion to Christianity before most of Europe even stopped worshipping tree sprites, and ports buzzing with trade across the Red Sea. Romans knew of Axum. Persians respected it. Indian traders sent spices through its docks. And while Rome had aqueducts, Axum had something maybe even better, functioning supply roads that snaked through mountains and valleys with such precision they could still be traced a millennium later. And no, they didn't have wheeled carts to ruin them with squeaky axle ruts. Just camel trains and sandal-clad officials delivering messages and taxes. Sometimes in that order. There's an old stump off to your right, twisted like a question mark. You rest a hand there and let your eyes wander along the ridgeline. It's not hard to picture how this place once pulsed with life. Markets chattering, drums calling council meetings, messengers slipping past wild dogs with reports etched on parchment and oilskin. You follow a bend in the road and find it suddenly widening. This isn't for commerce. This, you realize, is ceremonial. You can feel the reverence in the layout. Stones that once gleamed, maybe even sang under the right sandals. Quirky tidbit? Axum's most famous monuments aren't roads or palaces. They're monolithic stelae, towering obelisks carved from a single slab of granite. One of them, over 24 meters tall, marked a tomb but also hinted, some say not so subtly, at Axum's belief in continuity. They weren't building for now. They were building for whoever came next. And yes, a few of those stelae fell over during construction, so maybe not all the plans panned out. Back on the path, you notice a scattering of stones that seem too deliberate to be natural. A staircase, perhaps, or what remains of a watch post. You glance up and see a hawk circling. Even the birds here have a regal posture. And here's where the scholars start quietly dueling in dusty library corners. Historians still argue whether Axum's roads were planned centrally by the king's engineers or evolved organically as trade expanded. Either way, the outcome is hard to deny. A network that connected the highlands to the ports, the throne to the markets, the sacred to the practical. Your feet find a gentle rhythm now. The air is thinner up here, crisp like papyrus drying in the sun. You imagine walking this same road 1,000 years ago. Palace behind you, harbor ahead, the future packed in a satchel of frankincense and ivory. You reach a plateau and pause. Far off, beyond the hills, lies what used to be Adulis, Axum's primary port city. Ships once docked there from Byzantium and beyond, unloading amphorae of wine, bolts of silk, and the occasional traveler who had no idea what continent he'd actually landed on. That harbor may be silted over now, but the roads that fed it live on, overgrown, maybe, but not forgotten. There's something stubborn about Axum. It didn't shout. It endured. And its roads, though simple compared to Rome's polished grandeur, were reliable, renewable, and respectful of the land. That counts for something, doesn't it? A breeze kicks up, full of dust and perhaps the faint scent of cloves. You pull your cloak, or, let's be honest, your sleep blanket, tighter around your shoulders, and take one more slow look around. The sun dips lower. Shadows stretch long. And somewhere in the folds of the mountain, the echo of sandals against stone lingers, steady, unhurried, confident. Forward, always. You feel the terrain changing under your steps again, the cool breath of elevation giving way to the heat-stilled hum of southern Africa. And ahead lies the stone-lined memory of a civilization too often skipped in textbooks and dinner party trivia, Great Zimbabwe. The air here carries the soft tang of warm granite. Low hills roll like sleepy waves, and in the middle of it all, massive dry stone walls curve in elegant loops, entirely unmortared, just place stone on stone with the kind of patience you can only earn when you've got generations to perfect it. Welcome to the city of stone, of diplomacy, and yes, of surprisingly well-used dirt roads. You pick your way past the walls of the great enclosure, half expecting a sentry to call out, but there's only silence and the chirp of some wildly confident bird. Beneath your feet, the path is smooth, reddish clay, tamped flat by centuries of sandals, trade, and ritual. Roads like these didn't just connect homes to markets. They connected city to province, king to emissary, memory to message. The funny part? For all the towering architecture and trade with China, India, and the Islamic world, Great Zimbabwe didn't leave written records. So we pieced together the past from pottery shards, soapstone carvings, and yes, the whisper of roads curling out into the savannah. Fact check. At its peak around the 14th century, Great Zimbabwe was a bustling capital, commanding a trade empire that stretched to the east coast of Africa. Gold, ivory, and cattle wealth flowed out, glass beads, porcelain, and stories came in. These paths you now stroll? They likely felt the diplomatic weight of visitors from Kilwa, Mapungubwe, and maybe even Cairo, though they probably complained about the lack of shade too. Off to the left, under a mopane tree, sits the ghost of a cairn, rocks stacked not at random, but intentionally, possibly marking a crossroads, a territory, or someone's very serious claim to a goat dispute. You keep moving. This path has no signs, but it doesn't need them. It's made for people who knew where they were going, who followed the same routes their grandparents walked, who traced their way home with their feet, not with parchment. Quirky tidbit? Some researchers believe elite residents of Great Zimbabwe used polished granite walkways that may have glimmered under moonlight. Others argue these were drainage channels or simply aesthetic flourishes. Either way, it's safe to say the road game here was strong, if slightly glamorous. The walls to your right narrow, forming a kind of alley. This might have been a processional route, ceremonial, not commercial. Historians still argue whether these roads served religious functions or just helped direct foot traffic through tight living spaces. Given how many spiritual sites line these paths, we'll just say, both, and keep everyone happy. You pass another stone tower, like a giant grain silo sculpted by dream logic. Inside it? No one knows. Seriously. It's sealed. Some say treasure, some say sacred relics, some say nothing at all. Which is weirdly appropriate for a place where so much of the grandeur rests in what isn't written. A breeze stirs the grasses. You pause, taking in the horizon. Somewhere out there, smaller stone settlements dot the land, all connected like neurons by these same red earth roads. The road system wasn't paved or cobbled, but it was deliberate, sustained, and respected, and in many places still walked. Back near the enclosure, a line of stones parallels the path. Raised slightly. Could be drainage. Could be boundary. Could be someone's "Do not walk here" from 600 years ago. You sidestep it just in case. You let your mind drift to the emissaries who might have used these roads. People sent to negotiate marriages, trade agreements, peace treaties, or to show off a particularly majestic ox. Their journeys would have taken days, even weeks. But the roads helped them find their way, again and again, until the dust settled on empires and even the best memory faded. But the road? The road is still here. Carved in sun-baked clay. Echoed in stone lines that refuse to fall. Traced in the curve of your own footfall, steady and slow. You lean against a low wall, the stone warm from the sun. There's a calm here, the kind that hums under your ribs. It says people lived here. They danced, they bargained, they worried about rain and love and whether their teenager would ever learn to herd properly. And they built roads to carry all that life, soft, stubborn, sacred. You exhale and watch a lizard skitter across the path, tail raised like it owns the place. Maybe it does. You head north now, away from the great stone silhouettes of Zimbabwe and into the thick, breathing green of Central Africa, where the trees press close like gossiping neighbors, and the air hums with a different kind of infrastructure, the kind designed not with bricks or blueprints, but with machetes, woven mats, an instinct born of centuries. The rainforest doesn't give up its roads easily. They're rarely straight, never paved, and often invisible until you're already walking them. But they exist. And more than that, they endure. These are not the sweeping highways of empires or trade caravans. These are rainforest roads, pressed by bare feet and reinforced with woven branches, clever drainage ditches, and layers of hardened mud so fine they could pass for modern trail mix, minus the raisins. They're the veins of communities often written out of maps but never out of history. You move slowly, because the undergrowth insists. Ferns brush your knees. Sunlight filters in patches through the canopy, and somewhere off to your right, a monkey offers a running commentary you don't understand, but suspect might be rude. Now, here's the real kicker. Some of these roads were actually built to move the rain. Not stop it, not avoid it, just reroute it. Indigenous engineers shaped slight inclines and carved runoff channels by hand so that the relentless downpours would sweep away debris instead of turning the road to soup. The result? Travel that didn't end in an impromptu mud bath. Usually. Fringe detail incoming. Certain communities used hardened palm fronds and compacted bark as a kind of temporary surface. Think of it like medieval anti-slip mats, only biodegradable and often replaced by teenagers who grumbled just as much as modern ones. One of the more fascinating adaptations you notice as you walk, elevated walkways. Not everywhere, just in the soggiest spots, usually woven from liana vines and split bamboo, resting on carved posts. They sway a bit, yes, but they kept your feet dry, and that's worth the occasional wobble and mosquito dive bomb. Now you might be asking, did these qualify as roads or just well-worn trails? Great question. Historians still argue whether these pathways should be classified as formal infrastructure or simply organic patterns of movement. But the reality is, they connected people to people, villages to markets, healers to families, hunters to home. You step aside to let a memory pass. A group of women in bright wraps, balancing woven baskets on their heads, chatting and laughing as they move with the same rhythm the forest does. The road doesn't just carry them, it listens to them, grows with them. At one fork, you notice a totem, mud sculpted, decorated with feathers and red ochre. A marker. Not just a direction sign, but a spiritual checkpoint. A place where you'd stop, touch the wood, maybe mutter a blessing. The road isn't just a path through space, it's a bridge between visible and invisible worlds. And yes, if you're wondering, messages traveled here too. Not with parchment or pigeon, but with talking drums, a complex language of rhythm that could communicate detailed phrases across miles. A traveling merchant might hear news of a birth or an approaching storm before even reaching the next bend. You duck under a broadleafed plant, slick with leftover rain, and catch a glimpse of an old gathering place, a wide clearing, tamped flat, surrounded by low platforms. A kind of forest junction. Traders would stop here, share news, trade salt, smoked fish, iron tools. Elders might resolve disputes here, or simply enjoy the shade. And these roads? They were maintained. By communities, not states. By effort, not edict. If a branch fell, someone moved it. If a bridge sagged, someone tightened the rope. It wasn't central planning, but distributed responsibility. And in its way, that worked. Sometimes better than a king with a clipboard. What's striking here is the contrast. In Europe, the wettest parts became impassable. In Central Africa, they found a way to move through it. Not by fighting the jungle, but by cooperating with it. Like a slow dance. Mud as partner, not opponent. And no, they didn't use wheels much, not because they didn't know how, but because the wheel just didn't work that well in dense jungle. You try dragging a wooden cart through a forest and tell me how that goes. It's not about ignorance, it's about terrain. So goods moved by head, by shoulder, by clever packing, by foot. The rhythm of your steps starts to match the low drumbeat of the forest, a tempo not meant for speed, but for presence. Every bend in the path offers a small surprise, a stone seat under a vine-covered arch, a carved bowl left as offering, a bird so brightly colored it looks like it was designed by a child with too many crayons. You stop to rest on a raised log. It's warm, smooth, used by hundreds, maybe thousands of travelers before you. Some looking for medicine, some for marriage, some for meaning. And all of them guided by roads no mapmaker ever quite captured. But still, they remain. You ease back onto the path, the one that's not quite a path but more of a promise. A suggestion of direction in the undergrowth, where generations of footsteps have whispered, this way, this way. And as the vines shift behind you, closing over your passing like a curtain on a quiet stage, something else begins to settle into your thoughts. Something bigger than mud-packed roads or coral pathways. Tonight, it's time to talk about the stories we've been told, and the ones that got edited out. You see, for centuries, much of the world was spoon-fed this idea that Africa had no roads, no infrastructure, no sophistication. Just a wilderness of disconnected villages waiting for Europe to show up with its bright ideas and, civilization. Big air quotes. But here's the thing, historians still argue whether that narrative was ignorance, propaganda, or both. Maybe some travelers just didn't recognize a road unless it was cobbled and miserable. Maybe it was easier to justify colonization if the maps showed emptiness instead of systems. You keep walking, tracing the ghost roads beneath the leaves, and you wonder, how many empires vanish not from time, but from perception? Because the records? They're there. Arabic travelers wrote about paved streets in Timbuktu. Portuguese sailors admired Benin's long boulevards. Artifacts point to civic planning, consistent road grades, even early urban zoning in places European explorers assumed were wild. But that's not what made it into the textbooks. Or if it did, it got filed under curiosities. Like, look at this quirky thing some Africans did with bricks once. Before the real history started. And that's where we arrive at the primitive myth. A soft word with sharp edges. Primitive implies that nothing was happening until someone else showed up. That any road not modeled after a Roman aqueduct must have been an accident. That oral knowledge doesn't count unless it's on parchment in Latin. You brush your hand along a tree root shaped like a step. Not carved, just worn. That's a record too. Just not one bound in leather. Now, let's add some delightful pettiness to the mix. In the 19th century, European colonial officials often downplayed or erased road systems that threatened their sense of superiority. In some areas, they built over existing African roads and renamed them. In others, they let them crumble, then used the disrepair as evidence that the local population needed management. A fringe tidbit? There are documented cases where local kings were forced to take a back seat while foreign engineers discovered road designs that had been in use for centuries. Imagine someone inventing toast in your kitchen and then asking you to applaud. You sigh. It's not surprising, but it still stings. Because infrastructure isn't just about getting from A to B. It's about trust. It's about what a society values enough to maintain, even when no one's watching. Roads are love letters to future travelers. And for many African cultures, those roads were sacred. You didn't just build them to move goods, you built them to move relationships. Some routes were tied to spiritual practices. Others were seasonal, shifting like migrating animals. A few were passed down orally, marked by trees, rivers, or ancestral stones. But all of them mattered. And still do. Back in Europe, meanwhile, roads were often state projects, funded by tax collectors who got their teeth knocked in if they tried too hard. You can practically hear the gravel complaining under medieval boots. Not so here. The deeper truth you're starting to see is this: there isn't one kind of progress. There's just what works where you are. What fits your environment. What serves your people. What survives. In some cases, that's a winding rainforest road that flexes with the flood season. In others, it's a coral-paved Swahili alley you can sweep clean with a palm frond. Neither looks like Versailles, but both got people where they needed to go. With less gout, too. You pause where two paths diverge. One heads toward an old market site, the other to a dry season well. And in that pause, you feel it, that quiet dignity. That soft resistance to being forgotten. These roads may not have made it into European encyclopedias, but they made it into hearts, into rituals, into memory. Even now, researchers are revisiting aerial surveys and realizing just how complex many of these systems were. Trails once dismissed as animal paths turn out to follow economic hubs, water sources, and trade routes centuries old. It's like watching a hidden ink map appear under firelight. But the story's not finished yet. Because here's the hopeful part. New generations of African historians, linguists, and archaeologists are reclaiming those roads, sometimes literally. They're walking them, mapping them, restoring them. And they're doing it not to prove something to the world, but to reconnect with what was always theirs. And you? You get to be here for that. You get to walk this story not as a savior, not as a skeptic, but as someone willing to listen to roads that don't speak Latin. To feel the knowledge pressed into dirt instead of ink. To let go of the idea that history only happens in castles or behind velvet ropes. You step forward again. One foot, then another. The path ahead winds gently uphill, toward a ridge where the trees thin out and the stars peer in like curious strangers. You don't need a lantern. The road knows the way. The trees sway gently as you reach the ridge, where the canopy gives way to open sky and the wind brushes past your cheek like an old friend trying not to say, "I told you so." Below, the land rolls out like a forgotten quilt, patches of scrub, dust, green fields, and dark rivers winding like ink spilled across parchment. But most of all, what you see, if you look close enough, are lines. Lines that curve. Lines that intersect. Lines that persist. You kneel beside a stretch of packed earth just below the ridge. It doesn't glitter. It doesn't rise like a Roman aqueduct or demand reverence like a Gothic arch. But it's there. Broad. Straightish. Cleared with intention. Layered with gravel in places, with ruts carved by centuries of footfall, wheels, and hoofbeats. This isn't just a road. It's a message. And it reads something like, "We were here. We traveled. We built. We mattered." Tonight, this section of our journey takes us through the legacy of those African roads, what they carried, what they cost, and why, in more ways than one, they still endure. Let's talk the Kingdom of Congo. No, not the big green blur on modern maps labeled jungle, and promptly ignored by bored students. We're talking about an actual structured kingdom, thriving from the 14th century, with trade routes crisscrossing through regions we now call Angola, Gabon, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. These weren't goat trails either. Historians still argue whether some of Congo's roads were purpose-built for state use or if they evolved from ritual migration paths. But either way, they were extensive. Some were broad enough for carts. Others were bordered with trees. Envoys walked them bearing letters in intricate calligraphy. Merchants used them to deliver raffia cloth and ivory, salt and copper, even diplomatic gifts. And the best part? The infrastructure supported not just goods, but communication. Town criers, oral messengers, and runners kept distant corners connected, long before wireless towers and glitchy WhatsApp chains. In a twist the 19th century wasn't ready for, these systems worked well. Too well. Which made them a threat. So when colonial powers moved in, they often dismantled the road systems, not because they were broken, but because they proved too efficient. A people able to move, to organize, to communicate across distances? That wasn't great for empire building. Which brings us to a slightly awkward truth. Some of the very roads dismissed by European explorers were later copied, paved, renamed, and claimed as colonial gifts. A bit like stealing someone's bike and then giving it back with a ribbon and the receipt still in your pocket. But the roads didn't forget. In northern Nigeria, routes used by the Nok people were absorbed into Hausa trade networks. In Ethiopia, royal processions walked paths that had existed for generations, roads marked not by signage but by trees, shrines, and stone markers. Some connected highlands to Red Sea ports, ferrying salt and stories alike. In the Sahel, long-distance camel caravans moved along dusty ribbons known only to a few. These weren't just economic pathways. They were cultural lifelines, winding through oases, song cycles, and legends. There are even accounts, slightly fringed but undeniably juicy, of road maps carved into stone, visible only from the right angle under a desert moon. And it wasn't just kingdoms that had road systems. Even decentralized societies, like the Igbo or the San, had their own networks, woven through kinship, seasonal trade, and sacred geography. You couldn't always spot them from horseback, but you could feel them underfoot. The longer you stand here on this ridge, the clearer it becomes. Africa's roads weren't just about movement. They were about memory. They remembered which trees gave shade in the dry season, which stretches flooded every 5th year, which curve led to safety, and which one bent toward war. And they taught people how to listen, not to GPS satellites, but to elders, to wind, to soil. Europe, meanwhile, was still dealing with muddy cow tracks, frost heave, and the occasional Viking surprise party. A quirky fact? In 18th century France, the crown charged peasants with maintaining royal roads through a system called the corvée, basically unpaid labor. Imagine being woken up at dawn and told, "Surprise, today you're a human steamroller." No wonder so many rebelled. But here on this ridge, no one's rebelling. The air is quiet, heavy with the hum of a continent that has always moved at its own rhythm. And you start to wonder, what would it look like to center these roads in global history instead of tacking them on as footnotes? What if the story of transportation didn't begin with Roman engineers, but with the soft, deliberate steps of a Saharan merchant measuring distance and breadths? It's not just semantics. It's about whose footsteps echo through the stories we tell. And tonight you're hearing new echoes, deeper, older, more grounded. You take a few steps downhill. The gravel crunches softly, like popcorn on a movie night you didn't know you needed. And even though the sky has gone ink black above, the stars seem brighter here. Like they remember these routes too. And maybe that's the point. Because for all the effort that went into erasing these legacies from maps, books, and museum displays, the land remembers. The people remember. And you? You're learning to remember too. So go on. Keep walking. Follow that ridge a little further. Past the ghost of a market square. Past a shrine shaped like a stone bowl. Toward the next story waiting just around the bend. Down the slope you go, tracing the fading thread of road, its gravel now thinning into hard-packed dirt. The wind still hums behind you, but softer now, as if even the breeze knows it's time to settle. You step carefully around a patch of wild grass that wasn't here in the last section. Nature's way of reminding you that even roads built to last eventually surrender to time and silence. But their outlines linger. You can still feel the path under your feet like the faint imprint of handwriting on old paper. Tonight you arrive at the final leg of our journey through Africa's forgotten but extraordinary road systems, stretching far beyond empires and into the soft, steady hands of legacy. The kind not measured by asphalt or Google reviews, but by how long a path stays remembered, even if the world forgets who first walked it. Here, in the shadowy hinterlands of what is now Zimbabwe, you meet the echoes of Great Zimbabwe, once a stone city of over 10,000 people, thriving between the 11th and 15th centuries. Its walls still stand, curved like cupped palms, as if holding a story that got whispered away too soon. The roads that led to it weren't just practical. They were ceremonial, lined with stones and deliberate curves to slow your pace as you approach the sacred space. Historians still argue whether this layout reflected a cosmology, a defensive tactic, or just a design style that said, "No rush, this is important." Merchants walked those paths with gold, cowrie shells, woven baskets of grain. And elephants, yes, actual elephants, are believed to have helped transport supplies along these routes, according to oral histories. Talk about an all-terrain delivery service. And even further west, past dunes and rock-art-covered caves, you reach the edge of Tichitwalata, a chain of ancient settlements in present-day Mauritania, some dating back to 2000 BC. Built from stone long before the Iron Age kicked in, these early urban societies carved walkways between granaries, homes, and burial sites. The roads weren't just thoroughfares. They were architectural threads weaving together lives, seasons, and generations. Here, you get no royal names or battle lists. Just stone. Silence. Dignity. And as you turn eastward, toward the sun that hasn't quite risen yet in your imagination, your feet find the imprint of the Gold Road, one of many trade routes that connected West Africa's interior to the Saharan and Mediterranean coasts. These paths carried more than gold. They carried scholars, griots, salt slabs, and yes, books. Timbuktu wasn't just a poetic punchline or a way to say, middle of nowhere. It was a literary powerhouse, with roads humming with caravans delivering manuscripts written in Arabic, Fulani, Songhai. Entire libraries traveled on camelback. Scholars debated Islamic law, astronomy, and philosophy under palm-thatched roofs, and those ideas arrived by foot, hoof, and tireless legs trained on those very roads. Imagine a network of ideas where your data plan was a scroll in a leather satchel and your download speed depended on how fast a camel could trot. And still, the system worked. Better sometimes than the parchment-fueled bureaucracy of Europe's monasteries. A quirky fact? Some desert nomads today can still navigate ancient trade paths without GPS, just by reading wind patterns, dune formations, and even how the stars ripple across a camel's eyelashes at night. It's not magic. It's memory. And maybe that's what these roads teach best: how to remember. Not just names or dates, but intention. Craft. Use. Context. That a better road isn't always the one with the smoothest surface, but the one that brought people together, reliably, lovingly, for generations. You walk now past the ghost of an open-air council ring, the kind used by elders in Swahili city-states like Kilwa and Mombasa. The paving stones here aren't even. They dip and wobble in places, like elderly toes gripping sand. But they still hold. Conversations happened here. Marriages announced. Disputes settled over salted fish and ceramic cups of tea. And yes, colonialism paved over some of this, literally and figuratively. Many routes were redirected to ports, rail hubs, or military outposts. Others were renamed, buried, or simply deemed unworthy of study. But you know better now. Because tonight you walked the old lines. You traced the routes by feel. And you remembered. As you crest one last hill, the path beneath your feet fades into a soft bed of moss and red earth. No more gravel. No more outlines. But in your mind, the road still continues. And somewhere ahead, another traveler is doing exactly what you are, stepping carefully. Listening closely, learning to value what once was overlooked. You exhale, slowly. The stars shimmer above you like specks of quartz on velvet. And the land below still breathes. Because these roads? They were never really lost. They just needed someone to notice. So now, dear traveler, let the rhythm of footsteps fade. Let the dust settle behind you, soft and undisturbed. The ancient roads you've walked tonight, stone by stone, thought by thought, have grown quiet. But their presence still lingers in the gentle pulse of the earth beneath you. You've followed tracks worn not just by people, but by memory, by purpose, and by quiet acts of connection, caravans shared, paths repaired, promises kept over long distances. Let your breath match the hush of the savannah at night, where even the wind forgets to speak. Let your shoulders sink, like a stone finding its place in a centuries-old wall. The scholars of Timbuktu are resting now. The builders of Benin's streets have laid down their tools. Even the elephants that once walked with traders are asleep under moonlight trees, their dreams gentle and slow. The weight of history here is not a burden. It's a blanket, woven of stories, of sand, of legacy. You are part of it now. Not through conquest, Not through grand discovery, but through stillness. Through noticing. Through remembering what was always there. So close your eyes. Let the road drift away. Let the stars wheel overhead without urgency. You've walked far enough tonight. The past will wait. Hey guys. My name is Stefan. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means a lot and I look forward to bringing you new topics soon. Sleep well. The journey will still be here tomorrow. Stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you.